In the last few weeks, we've been preparing for a national election. And as the days grew closer to Election Day, I noticed that a number of people on their Facebook posts or on their Twitter were calling people to come out and vote, but they were also linking it to REM's song, "It's the End of the World as We Know It." There was a sense among people that this election day, nothing good was going to come of it, and somehow that the world was melting down. It was the end of the world as we knew it. Election day has come and gone. Our nation will go on, will move forward. There'll be good, there'll be bad. But there will be a day when the world will come to an end. And Ezekiel is one of the books that alludes to the end times, particularly in Ezekiel 38 and 39. In its most simple form, what you've got is another prophecy to Ezekiel, where he is told to preach to a nation and to tell them that while you attack my people, I'm going to come against you and I'm going to defeat you. All that's pretty straightforward. The apocalyptic part comes because the names that he uses for the nation don't exist in Ezekiel's day. They don't exist in our day. They're almost an idealized form of what an enemy of God could be. And therefore, the destruction of the enemy has a more lasting and final and end times kind of vision to it. So what we want to do is look a little bit at this strange 2 chapters in Ezekiel 38 and then apply it, see what it says to them, to us, in both places. So in Ezekiel 38 and 39 hold together as a unit in and of themselves, talking about this end of the world battle between the forces of evil and God. And after the vision that we saw last week of the Valley of Dry Bones being brought back together as a nation, it ends on a very positive note. Then in chapter 38, the word comes to Ezekiel. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief priest, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaw, bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer with all of its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north, all its troops, the many nations with you. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered around you, and take command from them. After many days you will be called to arms." And then it says, this is in verse 8, "In the future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They have been brought out from the nations and now all live in safety. You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land." So all of that seems pretty clear. He says, at a time in the future, the land of Gog, who is the chief prince of Magog, and these other Meshach and Tubal and Cush and Put will come together in a mighty battle, and they will sweep down onto Israel. Now that seems pretty straightforward, but he says this is going to take place in the future, in a time when Israel will have lived in peace and lived in safety for a period of time. They don't even have any walls up around their city, he says in the middle of the chapter. They're living in peace and safety, and because of that, this evil king is going to say, let's sweep down and defeat them. Now, historically, we don't have an account of something like this happening. There's a couple of things that point out that maybe we're dealing with something beyond just a historical recreation of something that's going to happen. Your first reaction when you read something like this is to try to take it as literally as possible. Okay, who's Gog? Who's Magog? Who are these other places? When is this happening? And that just doesn't work. There isn't a nation called Gog. And these other nations, well, they do kind of exist, but it makes more sense to think of them as 7 nations which encircle Israel and almost symbolically refer to all the enemies of God. Also because this doesn't take place until a time when Israel has returned to the land. So it's clearly future for when Ezekiel is talking. And they're now living in safety. And everything that has been taken away from them from the exile has been returned to them. And now they're living in this peace and safety. And then the enemies of God get together and sweep down and kill them. Now, we're tempted even to look at this as, could this be something that happens in the distant future from them or in our time? There are people who live in Palestine, and it's a Jewish nation, and they're surrounded by enemies. And so you say, maybe this is talking about something that's going to happen in the future. That would make sense. That's the next thing that you think of. And yet, as the battle is described, everybody's always riding in horses and carrying shields and things like that. And these nations still don't line up with nations today in that same way. So if you try to take it literally, either in the future or in the past, it doesn't seem to work. And yet there's clearly a picture here of a great battle that's supposed to happen in the future. And so what I think is happening is that God has given Ezekiel a message for his people. He has just told them, I'm going to rebuild your nation, and you're going to go back home. And now he's saying, when you go back home, you will live in peace and safety, but it won't just go on forever. It's not going to be the end. There's going to be another chapter in the story. You're going to live in peace and safety, and then the enemies of God are going to circle around you. But don't worry, God won't abandon you in the future. In the future, when the enemies of God encircle you and come against you, God himself will fight for you. That's the message of it. In fact, as the 2 chapters unfold, it's clear that God is drawing these people. He's almost prompting them to attack the nations so that when they attack, he can destroy them. He says at the end of chapter 38, the mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstone, and burning sulfur on him, and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. They will know that I am the Lord. So you've got this great God intervening to protect his people. You've got an enemy that is symbolic. It's got a symbolic name, Gog. It's got a symbolic number, 7 nations encircling from the south all the way around the north, encircling. You've got the people of God dwelling in peace. And in the beginning of the chapter, he talks about, I will put a hook in your mouth and I will pull you out, as if the forces of evil were like a giant sea monster that God is conquering. All of this seemed to point toward the fact that this is not just a single army coming against Israel, which is what happened with Assyria, it's what happened with Babylon. This is, in fact, a picture of all the forces that oppose God's people throughout time. They will come against and try to destroy everything that God is doing on the world. His people will be vulnerable. They will be defenseless. And the forces of evil will seem overwhelming. But God will be their protector. Again, it's tempting to look ahead to a time in the future when armies of evil will surround a literal Israel and come against it. That may happen. There's an allusion at the end of the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible. In 19 and in 20, there are scenes that sound a lot like this. And so the Apostle John picks up the language of Ezekiel saying, we're surrounded by enemies, but don't worry, God fights for us. And in the end, God wins. There are pictures here of God destroying the enemy and for them being utterly wiped out. And it's interesting because the images it portrays would be just what Ezekiel's audience would want to hear to know that the bad guys are going to be punished. and the good guys are going to win. It almost becomes cartoonish as you move into chapter 39, because it says the nation will be, the enemies will be destroyed, and then their bodies will just litter all over the ground. There'll be so much plunder that the Jewish people will go out and they'll collect up all of the weapons that came against them, and they'll be able to burn them. And in fact, for 7 years, they won't ever have to scavenge for firewood because they'll have so many weapons. This is a bizarre scene because, again, the enemies have come, they've been defeated, and then the Jewish people go out and pick up all the weapons. We don't have any sense that this happened in real history. And if it happens in the future, why are they using wooden weapons? Why are they using spears and shields rather than firearms or something like that? But it says, and they'll be able to burn them for 7 years. So there's obviously a symbolic message here. Then all these bodies are laid out. And at the end of chapter 39, God says, I will call out to every kind of bird and wild animal, assemble and come together all around the sacrifice I am preparing for you, the great sacrifice on the mountains of Israel. There you will eat flesh and drink blood. You will eat the flesh of the mighty men and drink the blood of the princes of the earth, as if they were rams and lambs and goats and bulls, all of them fatted animals from Bashan. At the sacrifice I am preparing for you, you will eat fat till you are glutted and drink blood until you are drunk. So there's a picture of God calling all the animals to say, scavenging animals, come and feast on these carcasses. A strange scene because all the scavenging animals were considered unclean. So God himself has prepared an unclean banquet for unclean animals to gorge themselves on all the leftover carcasses. Again, this is horrific imagery. But if you had been a suffering people at the hands of a brutal regime, this is exactly what you would want to hear, that we're going to win. The bad guys are going to be defeated, and they're going to be defeated by God. And it's going to be such an utter defeat that they won't even be able to be buried. And God himself will have all of their corpses licked clean. That is what people would have wanted to hear when they say, don't worry, I will protect you in the future. The overwhelming sense among the people was, God has defeated us and we're in exile. What's going to happen now? So God's first message is, after a period of time, I will bring you back. You will be a people, and I will make you a people in the land. Now his message is, and in the future, if the forces of evil array against you, and they will all come against you, I will defeat them. And I will defeat them utterly. And he puts it in language that Ezekiel's audience would be drawn out of their depression and into encouragement that their God is stronger than all the forces on the earth. That's a thing. When you're a suffering population, you really like knowing that God is stronger than those who oppose you and that one day he will defeat them. So that makes sense. It makes sense that people then would be given an image of God winning that would have satisfied them. It makes sense that we look at the end of Revelation and we say, one day God will win. One day God will defeat the forces of evil as they come against him. To a church living in the days of Nero, it was nice to know that no matter how bad things get, one day God will win, and he will right every wrong, and he will win every victory. But there's another way of looking at this. Although we don't have a picture of an army from the north and the south all surrounding, coming against the nation of Israel, and God wiping everybody out, and there just being carcasses all over the place. We don't have a picture of that in the days of bows and arrows and armies and that kind of thing. There is a time when Israelites are living in the land of Israel and where a powerful nation has surrounded them and overtaken them. And there is a time where the forces of evil sweep down on the nation of Israel and seem to be about to destroy a helpless person, but they are defeated. It's not a nation coming against the nation of Israel. It's the forces of all humanity coming against the person of Jesus. The one thing that you would never expect in this was that one day God would defeat the forces of evil, but he would defeat it by coming to earth himself. Jesus, as a representative of the nation of Israel, lives in the nation of Palestine, in the Jewish nation, and he is surrounded by enemies. Religious enemies, political enemies, pagans, the forces of darkness, they're all coming against him. And on Good Friday, they all conspire against him to swoop down on him and to render, and to fight him and to kill him. But out of that, God defeats evil. He defeats death and he defeats evil in himself through the resurrection of Jesus. The thing that no one could see coming, that they would never believe in Ezekiel's day, was that one day God would defeat evil. But he wouldn't defeat evil by just lining up all the bad guys and knocking them all down. He would defeat evil by putting himself in the middle and taking the forces of evil on himself, so that we, as God's people, would defeat evil just like Jesus did, through love and not through violence. One day, God will defeat all evil. He will put an end to all time, and he will deal with all of those who oppose him. And he puts that in imagery of warfare, because that we can understand. The mystery was that God would absorb the punishment himself through Jesus. And so we live in the time period where God is defeating evil, but he's defeating evil through good. He's defeating violence through love. He's defeating guilt through forgiveness. One day, Jesus will return, and he will deal with all evil, and every injustice will be dealt with. Until that time period, we realize that we serve a God who is more powerful than anything that we can grasp. He is more powerful than the forces at work around us. No matter how dark the world gets, we serve a God who is greater. And we serve a God who has already defeated the greatest evils of death and sin and violence through his Son, Jesus Christ.